Okay, so we're starting off here with a very simple program today. We include IOStream because it's going to be doing output. The program itself declares an integer variable, initializes it to 10, then prints out that value of that variable, preceded by the words a heading number is. And if I run it, let's just make sure it works correctly. Yep, okay, it works as I said it did. Always want to make sure something works before you add more stuff to it. Okay, so now let's suppose the next thing I wanted to happen in this program, I wanted the value of the number to change. That variable number, I want it to have a 5 in it instead of a 10. I could just say I could just type number equals 5 and assign a 5 to it, but since we're talking about functions, I'm going to try to do this with a function. So basically what I want a function that takes one integer parameter, one int parameter, and changes the value of that variable, of that parameter to 5. Okay, so I'm going to declare my function down here, define my function down here. My function is not going to return anything, so I start with the void as the return type. I'm going to name my function set5, so that's what follows. And then my parameter list, well, this function's going to take one integer parameter. So I'm going to declare one integer parameter, okay? And again, that just means that when this function is called, it is expected that one integer will be passed, will be provided in the function call. And what I want this function to do is take what was passed and assign a 5 to it. Okay, so that's really all I have to do here. And then, since the function doesn't return anything, the function call itself will just be a call to the function, followed by whatever I'm passing in. I'm going to pass in number, okay? And the idea is I'm expecting, what I'm expecting to happen here is I'm calling set5, I'm passing in number. We know that value and number are essentially the same at that point. So when I set value to 5, I'm assuming that I'm setting number to 5, and if I repeat this same statement here, I'm expecting the program to print out number is 10 and then number is 5. Okay, so let's start out by compiling this. I could just run it, and when you run it, it does actually recompile if necessary. Sometimes when you've just added new code, you just want to be sure it compiles before you try to run it. So I'm going to try to run this, and I do have an error. Okay, now the error I'm getting is it says identifier not found, and it's on this line. So right here I'm calling set5, and the compiler is saying, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what set5 is. Now you might first think, well, that's crazy. Right down here, I have that right here in this file. I have this function set5. But you have to remember that a compiler looks at a file from top to bottom to see if it's syntactically correct. So what it's going to do, the compiler is going to do here, it's going to look at this line and then this line, say, yeah, so it's think, yeah, that's set up right. Yep, this one's set up right. Then when it sees this particular line, it sees, well, that's a function call. Do I know anything? Have I seen anything thus far that lets me know anything about a function set5? And since there's no library included that has set5 in it, and there's nothing up here in my program that indicates a function set5, there's an error. Okay, so what I need to do is make sure that by the time the compiler gets down here, it knows that what a legal call to set5 would look like. So I'm going to up here put a prototype. In other words, a prototype of a function is just something that tells how the function needs to be called, what it returns, and what its name is. So here, this prototype indicates that there will be a function somewhere called set5. A function will be provided before this project is totally built, called set5. It doesn't return anything, and it takes one int parameter. And that's exactly what the compiler needs to know to determine if this line is correct or not. Okay, and now that I have that prototype there, my I have 0 errors, or no errors in my project. Okay, and again, I could have gotten rid of the error by moving this function definition up here, but typically professional programmers either put their functions following the main, because the main is really what you look at first when you read a program. You don't want to be distracted by all the functions first. So typically the main is put first, or very, very often, actually even more often, a function is placed in a separate file. And if it's placed in a separate file, I'd have to have the prototype here so that the compiler could compile this main function and then properly, and then when the project was actually built, set 5 would be included as well, and that would the location of that function would be resolved. Okay, so typically you don't put the functions before the main. That's kind of a novice approach. I mean, it's correct as far as the language goes, but people don't do it that way. Okay, so I've got my function, so I expect this to print out number is 10, number is 5, and when I run it, sorry, it says number is 10, number is 10. Okay, so it didn't do what I thought. Okay, even though I passed number in here and I changed, well, you know, the way my understanding thus far, right, or our understanding maybe thus far, of a parameter is this parameter associates with that argument. So I'm changing value, so I should be changing number. Well, that's not happening. Okay, the reason that's not happening is typically when you declare a parameter, the parameter is passed by value. Okay, and that value has nothing to do with the name of this parameter. It's probably a better name to do it that way. Okay, passed by value, parameter passing. Okay, there's a verb here, passed by value. Okay, so the parameter is passed by value. What that means is, okay, when you just declare a parameter like this, what happens is when an argument is provided, when the function is called, and the value of that argument, the contents of that variable, whatever is here, okay, whatever data is here is actually stored in this. Is actually a copy of it is made and stored in this. So actually, val is sort of like a variable, a local variable to set 5 that is given an initial value, and the value is what was passed in. So what happens is there actually is this variable called val, and a 10 was placed in that variable when this function was called. Okay, and then we changed the contents of that variable val to 5, which actually had no effect whatsoever on the variable number, because the contents of number were just copied into val. That's what parameter passing by value means. It means a copy of the argument is stored in the parameter. Okay? Okay, now, there's another way I could have written this function. I could have put an ampersand here, okay? Now, when I put an ampersand on a parameter, it's not being passed by value. The parameter is being passed being passed by reference. In other words, the actual argument is used. Okay, so what happens here, and maybe I can be more technical about this here, the actual address or the location of the actual argument is stored. Okay, so here what happens if I call set 5 number like this, okay, I'm going to give this guy a different name too. If I change this to 2, okay, so that there's a call, and I call pass in number. What's actually stored in this variable val is not a copy of number, as happened in this function. What was actually stored in here is the location of the variable number. And then every time val is used, okay, what's actually used is the argument that was passed, because When a 5 is going to be stored in val, well, what's in val? Val is contains the location of number, so a 5 is placed in number as opposed to being placed in val. In other words, val is storing a reference to the variable that's really going to be used, which is the actual argument. Okay. Of course, I will need a prototype for this one as well, so that my code will compile. And again, the prototype can, but it doesn't have to have a name for each parameter, because these prototypes are just provided so that the compiler has enough information, all the information that it needs to know to determine if this particular function call is correct or not. It needs to know there is going to be a function by this name. It needs to know how many parameters it takes and what type, and it needs to know the return type. Okay. So now I'm calling set5 too. Okay. Now calling set5, and let's see what happens. Okay, so now we saw our change. Number is 10, number is 5. And again, the reason being, this particular function has the ampersand. In other words, when it uses val, whenever val is used, the argument number is really being used. When I'm changing val, I'm really changing number. This function, when I'm changing val, I'm changing a variable that has nothing to do with number, that only stores a copy of what was in number. Okay. So I'm not actually affecting the argument that was passed in. So that's pretty much the difference between pass by value and pass by reference. When do you use pass by reference? Very often it's used when you have a function, and this doesn't happen to be an example of this. Here this is very simple. I could have maybe written a function that returns a int instead or something. But very often, pass by reference becomes very handy when you want to return more than one value from a function, since you actually can return only one value with the normal return mechanism. Or, again, here I just wanted to pass something in and have it change, so that was nice syntax for that, being able to set 5, that's very readable, and have number change. So reference parameter was the only way I could do it. Let's add one more little thing, point one little thing out here. Let's add, I don't normally declare variables in the middle of my program, but just so I don't upset the code above it, I will. I usually declare everything up at the top because it makes the code more readable. But let's suppose I have an array, okay? And I want to set my entire array to the value 15. I want to set all the elements in this array to 15. Now I could do it with the loop right here in the main, but I want to do it with a function. So I'm going to write a function called setAll. It's not going to return anything. It's void. That's why I'm calling it that way. It's going to take two parameters. It's going to take an array of ints, and it's going to take the size of the array, in this case 5. Okay? So the function I'm about to write is going to be called setAll. It will take two parameters. Okay? And it will not return anything. Now, let me write that void setAll. The first parameter was an integer array. The second parameter was an integer. The function's expecting that to be the number of elements in the array. And the purpose of this function, what it was supposed to do, is supposed to take an array and change all of its elements to 15. So I'm going to use a little loop here to iterate through the array. And I'm going to, in my loop, I'm just going to say array at I is equal to 15. Okay. Now, let's see. I think size is a keyword here. Let's see. Let me just do that. It might be a keyword. My language is mixed up there. My brackets go over here. Okay. So my parameter is a integer array. First parameter is an integer array. Second parameter is an int. And basically, I'm going to assume that this int is the size. The function assumes that int one is the size, and it's going to go through every element, loop through every element, and change the value of every element to 15. Now you would think, okay, and I will of course have to put a prototype up. Add that before I forget it. And again, prototypes don't have to, because the compiler doesn't use the information, but the names can be there. So I could just say int, open close bracket, and not have the word AR there. I could just say int up here in the prototype, because that's all the information the compiler will need to check that this statement is written correctly. Okay, and check that the function is being called correctly. Okay, so now you would expect that when I make this call and pass in my array, okay, that a copy, okay, because we're thinking call by value. I don't have any ampersands down here or anything, so we're thinking a copy of the array is being passed in, and the copy is going to be made, and the parameter variable is going to be changed, but not the actual variable list. But actually, arrays work a little bit differently. When you pass in, as an argument, the name of an array, the name of an array has a value, which happens to be the location of the array. This is how it works. So here I actually am passing in a location. And so when you pass an array as an argument, what is actually used is the array that is passed in. So in effect, this is already passed by reference, because I'm passing in a reference to the array. The reference to the array is going to be used. And this is all because the name of an array has a value, namely the location of the first spot in the array. Okay? So here, I don't have the ampersand here. I don't need the ampersand here. I believe I'd even get an error if I tried to pass that by reference. Okay, so let's see if that works. Oh, of course I didn't print it out, so how do we know, right? Let's see. Silly me. Okay, so now let's try that again. It should print out all the 5 values of the array on one line. Okay, so we see, that the call to set all, actually we declared the array, set all, passed in the array, and the size. That this function was called, it put a 15 in every element, and then when we return here and we print out all the array contents, we get the 5 15s. Okay, so pass it basically when you're passing an array as an argument, you are passing in a reference itself, and so the change is made to the actual array argument. So those are kind of the nuts and bolts of parameter passing.